Kagura 忍び vs 少女たちの証明
What's up YouTube? Leon here, and today I'm going to give my thoughts on one of my guilty pleasures. And if you haven't seen the title already, it's the Senran Kagura series, specifically the spin-offs. As you may know, Senran Kagura has finally made its way on Steam. What an age to be a PC gamer. But even before Senran Kagura made its debut on Steam, I was already a fan of the series. It all happened one day. The power of Amazon recommendations recommended me Senran Kagura Shinobi Versus for the Vita. I pretty much said, hey, Amazon recommended me this, it must be good. And to be honest, I did not regret this purchase. So what is Senran Kagura? And to put it simply, it's a fan-servicey, third-person hack-and-slash game. This type of game falls under that guilty pleasure category. You know, it's not something amazing, but you enjoy them so much you just can't help but buy them. So, I'm gonna try to gather my thoughts and try to tell you why I buy these games all the time. Oh, and if you hate fan service, you should really look somewhere else. The Senran Kagura games are just not for you. These games literally shove fan service in your face, and if that's not your thing, you're just gonna have a bad time. At this point, I played through Shinobi Versus, Estival Versus, and Deep Crimson for the 3DS, and I finally have a vague idea of why I play these games so much. The focus here will mainly be on the spin-offs, specifically Shinobi and Estival Versus. I also like these games better than the 3DS ones, so there you go. Before I talk about the games themselves, let me talk about the PC port of Shinobi Versus really quick. Major thing with this Vita to PC port is that it's not really that good. It's a barely passable, bare-bones port. The people who ported it just made sure that it worked and not much else. Sure, the 60 FPS is great and all, but it lacks what makes a good port a good port. Extra PC options is something that's missing for one. There is no graphical options outside of the game's resolution. There are some engine glitches with certain animations. Some animations play at double the speed in some areas. Specifically, the dressing room animations are double the speed. There's also this weird twitching that some enemies get. It's like they're having a seizure or something, I don't know. But what I'm pretty sure on is that these symptoms are of the change between the 30 to 60 FPS from the Vita version. The best thing I could say about this port is that it works. The port works and that's about it. It's kind of lazy in that sense, but it does work. Hopefully the developers who ported this learned a thing or two, and if and when the sequel gets a re-release on PC, it'll be a better port with more options and such. Alright, first things first, the story. You'll probably think these games have a story. I know, I thought that too, but the story of these games isn't that bad. Don't worry about spoilers, I'm just gonna give a brief description of each game's story really quick. Shinobi Versus' story revolves around the idea of what's considered good and bad. Different schools have different alignments, either being classified as a good or evil shinobi. It first starts out as that generic story of good ninjas are supposed to defeat bad ninjas, or kill them, essentially. So each school are just rivals against each other. Some big event called the Shinobi something showdown thing happens, and this is when characters from different schools fight other schools and defeat them or kill them. Then it kind of goes to the obvious twist of being classified as evil isn't necessarily evil, and being classified as good isn't necessarily good. The game essentially ends with everyone becoming friends eventually. No one really dies or anything like that, it just becomes your generic happy ending. It's serviceable, and it was a lot more than I was expecting from the first game's storyline. In the sequel, Estival Versus, You actually get a pretty good storyline this time around. Estival's story is centered around loss and how to cope with it. The characters from the first game are thrown into a different dimension where ghosts of their loved ones are unable to pass on. So the characters have to make a choice now, to either fight against the overseers of the festival and be able to go back home, or stay and live with the people they love in this alternate dimension. Estival's story is a lot more character-driven this time around, and it's probably one of the main reasons why I would recommend the sequel over the first. So one of the obvious draws of this game is variety. Senran Kagura games do this fairly well, at least in terms of characters. There are 22 characters in Shinobi and 28 in Estival. Characters vary in personality, size, and shape, if you know what I mean. Out of the handful of characters that the game presents you, you should be able to find one or two characters that fit your playstyle or taste. And you know what I mean by taste. Character looks, personality, fetish maybe? I don't know. Character customization is also a pretty big part of the Senran Kagura games. If you're bored with how a character looks, or if you're bored with the uniforms that all the characters wear, you can go into the dressing room and customize them. You can unlock and buy extra clothes and accessories to put on your characters in the dressing room. There's a fairly good amount of options in the base game, and in the PC version they just give you all the DLC for free essentially. Once you're done customizing your favorite character, you can touch him. You know, just touch him. Like that. Oops. It's not weird or anything. It's a feature. There is a ton of stuff to do in the Senran Kagura games. Just trying to complete the storyline alone will take you around 8 to 10 hours. And this doesn't include the side missions that each individual character has. While there is a lot to do, that doesn't mean that it's all meaningful. This really depends on what you're looking for. You are essentially doing the same thing over and over again. Many people can be turned off by this repetition, but the same can be said about the Dynasty Warriors games. But what keeps me going through these games is the gameplay and the stories combined with them. So let's talk about gameplay. It's also the main reason why I wanted to make this video in the first place. The gameplay of Senran Kagura is pretty simple. You go through a level, beat up fodder ninja, then beat up a boss or rival ninja until their clothes fall off. It's simple, stupid, and oddly satisfying. Both games at first glance are essentially the same. The way the levels work and the game mechanics are practically the same. But there are some major differences that I don't think people are aware of. The controls are simple. You have a light and a heavy attack, a dodge and jump, then you have your block and lock-on buttons, and finally your transform and frantic buttons. The simplicity of these games comes from being able to freely attack groups of enemies and feel like a powerhouse, a la Dynasty Warriors. So I think the main reason why I like Senran Kagura over Dynasty Warriors is how bite-sized the missions are. In Dynasty Warriors, I feel like you have to devote too much time in one session to actually get anywhere. While in Senran Kagura, once I finished a short level, I can just turn off the game and come back to it later. That's one major thing that I enjoy Senran Kagura over Dynasty Warriors. So at the start, your character's ability to combo is fairly limited. After going through a few levels with that character, they'll level up and you'll be able to add more hits into that character's combo string. The more you level up your characters, the more combo ability your character gains. So there is a form of progression system that's in place. Outside of your normal combat mechanics, there is transforming into your ninja form and frantic modes. While you defeat enemies, a yellow bar builds up and gives you ninja scrolls, which are used for supers. But before you can use a super, you have to transform first, which costs 1 scroll. When you transform, it not only heals your character fully, but now you're able to cast supers with the scrolls you've acquired. Each character has access to 3 different supers, level 1, level 2, and level 5. supers are completely different from character to character, so there is a ton of variety. Frantic mode is just like transforming, except you rip your clothes off instead. This lowers your defense but also gives you a ridiculous attack buff. This mode is pretty ridiculous and overpowered. It's great. Now I can talk about the two games mechanically. And I'm going to have to say I prefer Shinobi over Estival gameplay wise. If you're talking about graphics, story, or customization, then Estival has it beat, but somehow the gameplay of Estival falls apart. Shinobi has a type of looseness to it, and not that kind of looseness. It's a type of looseness where if you think it could work, it probably will work. The game gives you the ability to cancel out of attacks and actions at the push of a button. It makes you feel like there is no restriction on what you can do gameplay-wise. But in Estival, they changed that. The first major change in Estival is the speed. It's overall a lot slower than Shinobi. Every action now has a few frames of startup, making it feel a lot slower. Another gameplay restriction is movement. In Shinobi, you can cancel the majority of dashes and make almost all characters speed through maps without having to sprint. In Estival, the majority of characters could only dash once this time around. Another questionable change is being able to use supers in hit stun, which means you can super whenever you're being hit at any time. This goes for both you and your opponent. This is a dumb change that is more frustrating than helpful. And probably the most frustrating thing they added is the new reversal system. In Estival, if you get hit, you can either choose to stay in hit stun or do a backdash reversal. While in theory, this could be something new to mess around with, it was poorly implemented. Many characters' reversals are fairly useless and whiff way too often, and whiffing these reversals leaves you wide open to another attack or combo. I think the majority of these changes are on the developer's part. While the graphics and animations are a lot better this time around, I felt that the developers were so proud of the animations, they wanted players to see their work. Because they forced us to watch their new animations, it really impacted the gameplay, unfortunately. There are a ton more gameplay related things I don't like in Estival Versus, but this video would never end if I try to talk about all of them. So that will sum up the majority of things I wanted to say about the Senran Kagura series. I do wholeheartedly recommend both these games for different reasons. Unfortunately, I do feel that to get the most out of Estival is to play Shinobi first. While I did say the story of Estival is a lot better, you may get confused about the story situations and the character motives, because they were established in the previous game, and I don't think are iterated well enough to recommend Estival's story standalone. So yeah, that is Senran Kagura in a nutshell. If you're at all interested about these games, I would say go ahead and buy them. Whether it be from a fan service standpoint or a gameplay standpoint, you probably won't be disappointed. If you're in the mood for something Dynasty Warriors, but don't have the time to sit down and play for long periods, Senran Kagura is a pretty good alternative. And again, the fan service is there for the people who like fan service. And if fan service is not your thing, well then Senran Kagura won't be doing you any favors. This was Leon from Humans Plays, and I'll talk to you guys later. Oh, and Hanzo is trash.